Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth. Tonight, we are pulling back the curtain on a week of climate and technology stories that mainstream media wants you to see as isolated headlines, but when you connect the dots, a much bigger picture emerges.
And I'm Maya Clarity. From driverless cars rolling through Hong Kong's islands to the hidden math behind shipping your morning coffee, from grassroots climate warriors in black communities to a Supreme Court bombshell rattling global trade, tonight we are going deep. And I mean deep.
We're covering 5 stories tonight, and here's what I want our audience to understand right from the top: every single one of these stories is about power. Who controls the transition to a clean economy? Who gets left behind? And who is quietly making billions while the rest of us argue about whether climate change is even real?
So buckle up. We've got autonomous vehicles on Lantau Island, we've got carbon pricing that might not actually raise the cost of your groceries, we've got communities doing the work that governments won't, a tariff war that just got flipped upside down, and brand new rail standards that could reshape how Asia builds transit for the next generation.
Let's get into it. First up, Hong Kong just gave the green light for autonomous vehicles to drive longer, cross-district routes on Lantau Island. And the company behind the wheel? Baidu Apollo International.
That's right, Alex. According to the South China Morning Post, Hong Kong's Transport Department has updated the pilot license held by Baidu Apollo International, allowing their autonomous vehicles to operate from Hong Kong International Airport Island all the way through Sunny Bay and into Tung Chung Town Center. This is not a parking lot demo. This is a cross-district, real-world trial on public roads.
And let's talk about what this actually means. Tung Chung is a real residential community. We're talking about driverless vehicles operating alongside buses, taxis, pedestrians, and cyclists in an area where tens of thousands of people live and commute daily. The Transport Department says this supports the city's goal of deploying driverless vehicles for cross-district use in a safe and orderly manner, and that language comes directly from Hong Kong's policy address.
Here's what I find fascinating about the route choice. The airport to Tung Chung corridor on Lantau is strategic. It's a relatively controlled environment, newer roads, wider lanes, less of the chaotic density you find in Kowloon or Hong Kong Island. It's the perfect testing ground precisely because it minimizes risk while still providing genuine real-world conditions.
But let's not pretend this is just about Hong Kong. Baidu is China's tech giant, and Apollo is their autonomous driving platform. This is a beachhead. Hong Kong serves as a proving ground with international credibility, a common law jurisdiction with transparent regulation, that Baidu can then use to market this technology across Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and beyond.
And the climate angle here is significant. Autonomous vehicles, when deployed as shared fleets rather than private cars, have the potential to dramatically reduce urban emissions. Fewer vehicles on the road, optimized routing, electric powertrains. The International Energy Agency has modeled scenarios where autonomous shared mobility could cut urban transport emissions by up to 40% in dense Asian cities.
But here's the question nobody in the Transport Department is answering publicly: what happens to the thousands of taxi and minibus drivers on Lantau when this technology scales? Hong Kong's policy address talks about innovation, but it's conspicuously silent on workforce transition. We've seen this playbook before: technology gets fast-tracked, workers get an afterthought.
That's the tension at the heart of every green technology story, Alex. The technology itself might be climate positive, but the deployment model determines who wins and who loses. If autonomous vehicles replace public transit workers without retraining programs, without social safety nets, you're solving one crisis while deepening another.
And I want our viewers to note something else: Baidu Apollo International is the entity holding this license, not a Hong Kong company. The intellectual property, the data collection, the algorithmic decision-making, all of that flows back to a Beijing-headquartered corporation. In an era where data sovereignty is a major geopolitical issue, Hong Kong is essentially letting a mainland Chinese tech giant collect granular mapping and traffic data across its territory.
To be fair, the Transport Department has regulatory oversight, and Hong Kong does have data privacy ordinances. But you raise a valid point: the governance framework for autonomous vehicle data is still being written in real time, not just in Hong Kong but globally. And the companies that get to test first are the ones that shape those rules.
Exactly. First mover advantage isn't just about market share. It's about regulatory capture. Let's move on to our second story, and this one is going to change how you think about the price tag on climate action. Maritime decarbonization, and why it might not cost you a single extra cent.
This is a brilliant piece of analysis from CleanTechnica. The question is deceptively simple: if Europe keeps pushing carbon prices higher, and policymakers are modeling scenarios of 150, 300, or even higher euros per ton of CO2, does shipping become inflationary? Does cleaning up the maritime industry raise the cost of everything we import?
And the answer, according to this deep dive, is almost certainly no. Here's why. Shipping costs are a remarkably small fraction of the final price of consumer goods. We're talking about fractions of a percent for most products. When you buy a television, a pair of shoes, or a bag of coffee, the ocean freight component is tiny compared to manufacturing, marketing, retail margins, and last-mile delivery.
Let me put some numbers on that. For a typical container of consumer electronics worth several $100,000, the shipping cost might be $3,000 to $5,000. Even if you doubled the fuel cost through carbon pricing, you're adding pennies per item. The fossil fuel industry has spent millions promoting the narrative that decarbonization will make everything unaffordable, and the actual math simply does not support that claim.
And here's where it gets really interesting, Maya. The maritime industry is responsible for roughly 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, about 1 billion tons of CO2 per year. That's more than most countries. And yet the International Maritime Organization has been dragging its feet on meaningful regulation for decades, largely because shipping companies and oil state delegations have blocked aggressive timelines.
The European Union's emissions trading system has started to change that calculus by putting an actual price on maritime carbon within European waters. And the analysis shows that even at aggressive carbon prices, the impact on consumer prices is negligible. So when industry lobbyists stand up at IMO meetings and say decarbonization will cripple global trade, they are not citing evidence. They are protecting margins.
Let's talk about what maritime decarbonization actually looks like. We're seeing a transition toward green methanol, ammonia, and eventually green hydrogen as marine fuels. Companies like Maersk have already ordered methanol-powered container ships. The technology exists. The fuels are scaling. The only thing standing in the way is political will and incumbent resistance.
And this is where the carbon pricing mechanism becomes so important. Without a price signal, there's no incentive for shipping companies to invest in cleaner vessels. The current fleet runs almost entirely on heavy fuel oil, the dirtiest, most sulfur-laden fossil fuel on the planet. It's literally the bottom of the barrel, the residue left over after refining crude into gasoline and diesel.
So we have an industry burning the filthiest fuel imaginable, emitting as much CO2 as major industrialized nations, and the primary argument against cleaning it up is that it might add a fraction of a percent to the cost of a container of goods. That's not an economic argument. That's a lobbying strategy.
And the article makes another crucial point: the transition to clean fuels could actually reduce shipping cost volatility over time. Fossil fuel prices swing wildly based on geopolitical crises, OPEC decisions, and speculative trading. Green fuels produced from renewable electricity have much more stable and predictable pricing. So decarbonization might actually make global trade more stable, not less.
Which brings us to our third story, and this one is personal. Black communities across America are not waiting for Washington or Wall Street to solve the climate crisis. They are building the solutions themselves.
According to CleanTechnica's reporting, Black communities and organizations across the United States are serving as climate innovation hubs, providing clean energy, clean water, affordable green housing, and healthy food. And this is not charity work. This is community-led economic development that happens to be some of the most effective climate action in the country.
Let's set the stage here. Environmental justice research has shown for decades that Black communities bear a disproportionate burden of pollution and climate impacts. Fossil fuel infrastructure, refineries, chemical plants, highways, waste facilities, has been systematically located in or near Black neighborhoods. This isn't accidental. It's the result of decades of discriminatory zoning, redlining, and regulatory neglect.
So when we talk about Black communities leading on climate, we need to understand, they're not doing this because it's trendy. They're doing this because their survival depends on it. These communities have been on the front lines of environmental harm, and now they're building the front lines of environmental solutions.
And the scale of what's happening is remarkable. We're seeing community solar projects that bring clean electricity to neighborhoods that have been paying some of the highest energy bills in the country. Urban farms and food cooperatives addressing food deserts while sequestering carbon. Green affordable housing developments that cut energy costs for residents while reducing building emissions.
What makes these initiatives so powerful is that they're integrated. They don't just solve one problem, they address energy poverty, food access, housing affordability, job creation, and climate mitigation simultaneously. That's the kind of holistic approach that government programs almost never achieve because they're siloed into separate agencies and funding streams.
And here's what should make every policymaker uncomfortable: these community organizations are often doing this work with minimal federal support. In fact, many have seen their funding threatened or cut entirely under the current administration. The Inflation Reduction Act channeled significant resources toward environmental justice, but implementation has been slow, and political headwinds are fierce.
The article makes a critical point about transparency and visibility. Many of these black-led climate initiatives are simply not known outside their communities. The mainstream climate narrative centers on tech billionaires, Silicon Valley startups, and European policy frameworks. Meanwhile, community organizations in Atlanta, Detroit, Houston, and dozens of other cities are delivering measurable climate results right now.
And the economic model is different. These aren't venture capital-backed moonshots designed to generate returns for investors. They're cooperative, community-owned models designed to build wealth within the neighborhoods they serve. The profits stay local. The jobs go to local residents. The decision-making power stays in the community.
Which is exactly why they get overlooked. Our economic system values scale and extraction, take resources from communities, concentrate wealth elsewhere, and call it efficiency. What these black-led organizations are doing is the opposite, building distributed, resilient, community-controlled clean energy systems. That's threatening to the centralized utility model.
Let me be direct with our audience. If you care about climate change and you're not paying attention to what black communities are doing, you're missing the most innovative climate work in America. Full stop. These organizations deserve funding, media attention, and policy support, not as an afterthought to environmental justice, but as a central strategy for national climate action.
And the data backs this up. Community-led clean energy projects consistently show higher rates of local job creation, lower energy costs for participants, and stronger community buy-in than top-down utility-scale projects. When people own and control their energy infrastructure, they maintain it better, they expand it faster, and they build political support for the clean energy transition.
Now let's shift gears to our fourth story, because a Supreme Court ruling just sent shockwaves through global trade, and the climate implications are enormous. Taiwan is scrambling for clarity after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down President Trump's tariff authority.
Here's what happened, according to the South China Morning Post. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled against President Trump's broad use of tariff powers, essentially finding that the legal basis he'd been using to impose sweeping tariffs was unconstitutional. In response, Trump immediately invoked a different statute, Section 122 of the U.S. Trade Act of 1974, to impose a 15% global tariff.
Now, Section 122 is a limited emergency provision. It was designed for temporary balance of payments crises, not as a permanent tool for restructuring global trade. Legal scholars are already questioning whether this alternative basis will survive its own legal challenge. But in the meantime, we have a 15% tariff on virtually all imports, and countries like Taiwan are trying to figure out what this means for deals they thought they'd already made.
Taiwan moved swiftly to seek clarification from Washington, and for good reason. Taiwan's economy is built on semiconductor exports to the United States. TSMC, the world's most advanced chipmaker, is a Taiwanese company. Any disruption to the Taiwan-US trade framework has immediate implications for the global technology supply chain.
And here's where the climate connection comes in, because this is a climate show. Semiconductors are the foundation of the clean energy transition. Every solar panel, every wind turbine controller, every electric vehicle, every battery management system, every smart grid component, they all run on chips. A 15% tariff on Taiwanese semiconductors is effectively a 15% tax on clean energy technology.
That's an insight that almost no one is talking about, Alex. The trade war is usually covered as an economic or geopolitical story. But when you tariff the components that go into solar inverters and EV powertrains, you are directly increasing the cost of the energy transition. You are making it more expensive to fight climate change.
And the timing could not be worse. The United States is in the middle of a historic build-out of clean energy manufacturing, driven by Inflation Reduction Act incentives. Factories are being built. Supply chains are being established. And now a 15% tariff on critical components threatens to blow up the economics of projects that are already under construction.
Taiwan has been negotiating tariff exemptions under its existing trade framework with the U.S. But with the Supreme Court ruling invalidating the previous legal basis and Trump pivoting to a new statute, all of those negotiations may need to start over. The uncertainty alone is damaging. Companies can't make investment decisions when the trade rules might change overnight.
And let's be honest about what's really going on here. This tariff chaos isn't about protecting American workers or reducing trade deficits. It's about political leverage. Taiwan is being used as a bargaining chip in a larger geopolitical game, and the collateral damage includes the clean energy supply chain that both countries desperately need.
The semiconductor industry has been making significant strides in reducing its own environmental footprint. TSMC has committed to net zero emissions by 2050 and is investing heavily in renewable energy procurement. Disrupting the trade relationship doesn't just harm the clean energy transition downstream, it potentially undermines the industry's own sustainability commitments by creating financial instability.
One more point on this story. The Supreme Court ruling itself is a reminder that climate policy in the United States is built on an incredibly fragile legal foundation. Executive actions can be struck down. Statutes can be reinterpreted. What looks like settled policy one day can be upended the next. Until Congress passes comprehensive, bipartisan climate legislation, the entire U.S. climate framework is one court ruling away from chaos.
And that legal fragility doesn't just affect the United States. Every country that makes trade or climate deals with Washington has to factor in the possibility that those agreements might not survive the next election or the next court case. It makes the U.S. an unreliable partner at exactly the moment when reliable international cooperation is most needed.
Alright, let's bring it home with our fifth story. Hong Kong has just released its own comprehensive railway standards for the first time, a 336-page document that could reshape how the city builds transit for the next decade and beyond.
The Highways Department released this document outlining a unified and comprehensive set of technical references and guidelines for railway design, construction, and operations. They've also established a dedicated inspection unit to accelerate new projects. Analysts are calling this a foundational move for Hong Kong's next decade of transport development.
Now, I know what some of our viewers might be thinking: railway standards. That sounds bureaucratic. But stay with me, because this is actually one of the most consequential climate stories of the week. Rail is the backbone of low-carbon urban transport. Every kilometer of rail built is a kilometer of road capacity that doesn't need to be expanded. Every passenger on a train is a passenger not in a car.
And Hong Kong's rail system, operated primarily by the MTR Corporation, is already one of the most efficient and heavily used in the world. It carries millions of passengers daily with one of the highest fare box recovery ratios of any transit system globally, meaning it actually covers most of its operating costs through ticket revenue, unlike most systems that require heavy subsidies.
So when Hong Kong establishes its own rail standards, rather than relying on a patchwork of British, European, and international standards as it has historically, that's a statement of intent. They're saying, we are going to build more rail, we are going to build it faster, and we are going to do it our way.
The sustainability angle is embedded in these new standards. The document specifically addresses cutting-edge construction technologies, which in the rail context means things like modular construction, prefabricated components, and advanced materials that reduce the carbon footprint of building the infrastructure itself. The embodied carbon in construction is a major factor. Concrete and steel production for rail projects generates significant emissions.
And the dedicated inspection unit is the enforcement mechanism. You can write all the standards you want, but without inspection capacity, they're just paper. By creating a unit specifically tasked with railway inspection, Hong Kong is signaling that these standards will be enforced, not aspirational.
Here's the broader strategic picture. Hong Kong is positioning itself as a rail technology hub for the Greater Bay Area and potentially for Belt and Road Initiative projects across Asia. If other jurisdictions adopt Hong Kong's standards, or if Hong Kong's standards influence regional frameworks, that's enormous leverage over how trillions of dollars in Asian infrastructure investment gets built.
And that brings us back to the climate calculus. Asia is where the future of global emissions will be decided. The infrastructure being built right now in China, Southeast Asia, and South Asia will lock in emission patterns for 50 to 70 years. Rail standards that prioritize sustainability and advanced low-carbon construction methods could have an outsized impact on global emissions trajectories.
The analysts quoted in the South China Morning Post are right to call this foundational. We're not just talking about one city's transit system. We're talking about the technical DNA of rail infrastructure across one of the fastest-growing regions on the planet. Get the standards right, and you bake sustainability into every project that follows.
And when you pair this with the autonomous vehicle testing we discussed earlier, you see Hong Kong making a comprehensive play for transport innovation leadership. Autonomous vehicles for first-mile, last-mile connectivity, heavy rail for the spine of the network, and now standardized guidelines to ensure it all gets built to a high environmental benchmark.
Now, Alex, let's do what we do best on this show. Let's connect all 5 of these stories, because the pattern here is unmistakable.
Absolutely. Here's what I see. We have 5 stories from 3 different parts of the world: Hong Kong, Europe, the United States, Taiwan, and every single one of them is about the same fundamental question: who controls the infrastructure of the future, and will it be built for climate resilience or for corporate profit?
In Hong Kong, you have a government actively building the physical and regulatory infrastructure for low-carbon transport, autonomous vehicles, rail standards, inspection capacity. They're doing it deliberately, with long-term planning, and with a clear eye toward regional influence. Whatever you think about Hong Kong's political situation, the infrastructure strategy is cohesive.
In Europe, you have policymakers putting a real price on carbon emissions from shipping, and the analysis shows it's affordable. The argument that decarbonization is inflationary is collapsing under its own mathematical weight. The real question is whether the IMO will follow Europe's lead or continue to be captured by fossil fuel interests.
In black communities across America, you have people building the clean energy future from the ground up, not waiting for permission, not waiting for funding, just doing the work. And they're being systematically ignored by the very institutions that claim to care about climate justice.
And then you have the tariff chaos. A Supreme Court ruling that destabilizes the semiconductor supply chain, which destabilizes the clean energy supply chain, which destabilizes the entire economic framework for the energy transition. All because one country can't get its legal and political house in order.
The contrast is stark, Alex. On one side, you have deliberate, long-term infrastructure planning, Hong Kong's rail standards, Europe's carbon pricing, community-led clean energy. On the other, you have chaos as legal uncertainty, political whiplash, and an administration that treats trade policy like a poker game while the planet burns.
And the through line, the thing that connects all 5 stories, is that the climate transition is not primarily a technology problem. We have the technology. Autonomous electric vehicles exist. Clean maritime fuels exist. Community solar works. Efficient rail systems work. The problem is governance. The problem is who gets to make the decisions and who those decisions serve.
When governance is stable and forward-looking, you get comprehensive rail standards and expanding autonomous vehicle trials. When governance is captured by industry, you get decades of IMO inaction on shipping emissions. When governance is community-controlled, you get innovative climate solutions that actually work for the people who need them most. And when governance is erratic and self-serving, you get tariff chaos that undermines the entire transition.
So here's our challenge to you, our viewers. Don't look at these stories in isolation. The autonomous vehicle test on Lantau is connected to the railway standards document, which is connected to the carbon pricing debate in European shipping, which is connected to the tariff uncertainty hitting semiconductor supply chains, which is connected to whether communities in Atlanta and Detroit can access affordable clean energy technology.
It's all one system. And the question isn't whether we can decarbonize, the math on shipping shows we can do it cheaply, the technology in Hong Kong shows we can do it smartly, and the communities in America show we can do it justly. The question is whether our institutions, our courts, our trade frameworks, our international organizations, will get out of the way and let it happen.
Or whether the people profiting from the old system will continue to use every lever of power available, legal challenges, trade wars, lobbying campaigns, media narratives, to slow the transition just long enough to extract a few more years of fossil fuel profits.
That's the story behind all 5 stories tonight. And it's the story we'll keep covering every single week on Truth Report, because someone has to connect these dots, and the mainstream media won't do it.
Before we go, here's what I want you to do this week. Look up what's happening in your own community on clean energy. Find out if there's a community solar project, a local climate organization, or a transit expansion plan in your area. The work being done in black communities across America proves that change doesn't have to come from the top. It can come from your neighborhood.
And pay attention to the trade stories. I know tariffs sound boring. I know Supreme Court rulings sound like inside baseball. But when a 15% tariff lands on the semiconductors that go into your solar panels and your electric vehicle, that's a climate story. That's your story. Follow the money, follow the supply chains, and you'll find the climate connection every single time.
That's our show for tonight. I'm Alex Truth. Remember, the truth doesn't hide. It gets buried. Our job is to dig it up.
And I'm Maya Clarity. When the picture looks confusing, look harder. The pattern is always there. We'll see you next week on Truth Report. Stay informed, stay critical, and stay loud.
Good night, everyone. Truth Report, where the news